Have you ever really thought about who decides where our water goes? Who says how much goes to your tap at home versus, say, the farm down the road or that big factory across town? It's a huge deal, one of the most critical decisions for any country, really. So today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the guardians of our water here in the Philippines. We're going to dive deep into the National Water Resources Board and the foundational law that gives it all its power, the Philippine Water Code.
But first, let's set the stage. Why does this matter so much, especially right now? Well, it's because our most essential resource is facing some really serious challenges. From our biggest cities to the most remote farmlands, the stability of our water supply just isn't something we can take for granted anymore.
The heart of the problem is that we're living in a world of extremes, and it's all being driven by climate change. One minute, we're dealing with devastating floods, way too much water. The next, we're in a long, drawn-out drought with far too little. This kind of volatility, it hits everything: our food, our coastal communities, even our health. The very predictability of water, something we've always relied on, is now on the line.
Okay, so with the stakes that high, who's in charge of steering the ship? Who is the protagonist in this story of water governance?
That protagonist is the National Water Resources Board, or as you'll hear me call it, the NWRB. This agency sits right at the very heart of the country's water management system. It's the central hub connecting and regulating pretty much everyone who uses water.
The best way to think of the NWRB is like the nation's traffic controller, but for water. Its official job is to be the national coordinating and regulating agency, so it's their responsibility to make sure our water is developed and managed in a way that's cohesive and, really importantly, sustainable. Now, they don't actually build the dams or lay the pipes themselves, but they are the ones who set the rules of the road for everyone who does.
And that massive job really boils down to three core functions. First up, you've got policy formulation. This is where they create the nation's big picture strategy for water. Second, there's resource regulation, and this is their critical day-to-day work. It involves granting permits and, when conflicts pop up between users, mediating them. And finally, there's economic regulation. This is where they oversee the rates and fees that water utilities charge us, trying to strike that tough balance between keeping the company healthy and keeping water affordable for the public.
And this agency didn't just appear out of thin air. It's evolved over decades. It actually started back in 1974 as the National Water Resources Council. A couple years later, it got its real teeth when the Water Code was passed. Then, in 1987, it got the name we know today, the NWRB. In 2002, it was moved under the DENR, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. And just last year, in 2023, the whole system evolved again with a new coordinating office, the WRMO. So what this timeline really shows is a constant adaptation to the country's changing needs.
Now, that whole story of evolution is deeply tied to the NWRB's legal foundation. You really can't understand the board without understanding the rulebook that it uses for literally everything related to water in the Philippines.
And here it is. Formally, it's called Presidential Decree 1067, signed into law way back in 1976. The whole point of it was to take all the different fragmented water laws that existed before and bring them all together into one single comprehensive code. This document, this is the ultimate source of the NWRB's power.
Okay, if you remember only one single thing from the Water Code, it has to be this sentence from Article 3. All waters belong to the state. This is the cornerstone, the absolute bedrock principle. It's known as the Regalian Doctrine. And what it means is that no person, no company, can own a river or a lake or even the groundwater that's flowing underneath their land. It's a public resource managed by the government for all Filipinos.
And when the code says all waters, believe me, it is incredibly specific. It covers everything. We're talking rivers, lakes, groundwater, atmospheric water, seawater, even the rain that falls on private land. The scope is just massive, making the state's ownership totally absolute.
Okay, so if the state owns all the water, what does that actually mean for you, or for a farmer, or for a factory? How does this big legal principle actually work in the real world?
Yeah, that's the logical next question, right? If you don't own it, how on earth can you use it? Well, the answer lies in a very specific legal tool that was set up by the Water Code.
The answer is something called a water right, and I want you to pay close attention to the key word here, privilege. A water right is not ownership. It's a formal privilege, kind of like a permission slip from the government, that allows a user to take and use a certain amount of water for a specific purpose. And that privilege becomes official through this document, a water permit. This is the physical piece of paper issued by the NWRB that makes a person's or a company's use of water totally legal. And getting one isn't easy. It involves a formal application, public notices, and technical studies before the NWRB board gives its stamp of approval.
So who needs one of these? Well, basically any group using a significant amount of water. This includes municipal water systems for our homes, huge irrigation projects for farms, hydroelectric power plants, fisheries, and industrial factories. And listen, these permits aren't blank checks. They come with really strict conditions on how much water can be used, for what purpose, and they require reporting to make sure everyone is being responsible.
And yep, the journey starts with paperwork. A lot of it. Looking at the actual forms here, you can see the kind of detail they need. The main application is where you spell out who you are and what you plan to do. But then there's this notice of application. This part is critical. It has to be posted publicly. It's all about transparency, giving anyone who might be affected a chance to see your plans and voice their concerns.
So the process itself is a multi-step journey. First, you get your application screened to make sure it's complete. Step 2, you pay the fees. Step 3, you officially file it and post that public notice we just saw. After that comes a really important part, a field investigation. Someone from the NWRB actually goes to the site to verify all your data and to make sure the water source can actually handle what you're proposing.
And we're not done yet. After the investigation, there's an evaluation, which leads to a recommendation. If everything looks good, you don't get the final permit right away. First, you're issued a conditional water permit, a CWP. You can think of this like a learner's permit. It gives you the green light to build your infrastructure. Once you've complied with all the conditions and proved your system works, then, finally, you get the official water permit.
But what if you're not just using water, but actually selling it? What if water is your business? Well, that brings us to a whole other level of regulation.
For any private company to operate a water utility and charge customers, they need more than just a water permit. They need what's called a Certificate of Public Convenience, or a CPC. This is the government's official license to be in the business of selling water.
And this CPC is all about balance. On one hand, it lets the company operate legally and charge government-approved rates or tariffs so they can recover their investment. But on the other hand, it protects you, the consumer. It ensures those rates are fair and the service meets certain standards. The government's job is to be the referee and keep that balance.
And that regulation is scaled right from the very beginning. This table makes it super clear. A small communal irrigation system might pay 550 pesos to apply. But a large corporate-run municipal system, that's going to be 7,200 pesos. The fees reflect the size and potential impact of who's asking for the water.
And you know, this is a question that really stumps a lot of people. I mean, you've already gone through that whole long process to get a water permit. So why on earth do you need another certificate? Isn't the right to use the water enough to start a water supply business? It seems like it should be, right? Well, the answer is this. The CPC, or Certificate of Public Convenience, is the formal franchise to operate. It's the piece of paper that legally transforms you from just a water user into a public utility. And it's such a crucial step because it protects everyone. It protects the operator by letting them charge approved rates to recover their costs, and it protects us, the public, by making sure there's regulatory oversight and high service standards. And getting a CPC is, believe me, a rigorous process all on its own. It's not just paperwork. We're talking public hearings, where the community actually gets to have a say. And then the NWRB does these deep dives into the applicant's financial and technical capabilities. It's all to make absolutely sure that anyone who gets one is truly capable of providing a safe, reliable, and viable water service to the public. So, let's say an operator has jumped through all the hoops. They have their water permit and their CPC. The journey isn't over, not by a long shot. Now they have to operate under a really strict set of rules, all while fitting into the country's much bigger vision for water management. And these rules are absolutely non-negotiable for anyone holding a CPC. They're really the core of public protection. They make sure the service is continuous, the rates are fair, and, most importantly, that the water coming out of your faucet is safe to drink. This is the government's way of making sure that public trust is upheld.
So the laws can provide the how, but the why, the will to actually do it right, that has to come from all of us. Now that you've seen a bit of the intricate system behind the tap, the question left for us is, how can we as individuals and as a country become better stewards of this resource that gives us life?